52 Hells Angels rode into Winnemucca, Nevada on a Tuesday afternoon. They didn't come for a rally. They didn't come for a funeral. They came because a woman in a mustard yellow uniform had been earning $700 a week for 3 years and keeping 60 of it. And the man who took the rest had made one mistake. He sent her to work at a diner where a retired Nevada Highway Patrol officer stopped for cherry pie. She had tried to get out 4 times. A police officer left a pamphlet on the counter. A shift manager said he couldn't get involved in marriage stuff. A domestic violence center sent an auto reply. And 3 women at a church fundraiser looked directly at the GPS tracker on her wrist and told her she was lucky to have such a devoted husband. 4 times, the system chose the easier explanation. On the 5th try, she didn't file a report. She walked to the corner table, refilled a stranger's coffee, and said 9 words she had been rehearsing for 11 days. 97 minutes later, 52 motorcycles were parked on Highway 80 between the Silver Sage Diner and the edge of town. Not blocking traffic, not making noise, just present, the way a fact is present. Her husband's truck slowed at the on-ramp, read what was waiting for him, and did not turn in. This is Deb and Ruben's story, and it doesn't end the way Clifford Marsh had planned. Before we go any further, think about someone in your life right now. Just one person. The person you would want at that corner table if it were you. Hold on to that name. We'll come back to it at the end. Subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments below. I want to know where you are when you hear this one. Now, Tuesday, 2:17 p.m., Silver Sage Diner, Highway 80, 4 miles east of Winnemucca, Nevada. He sells my shifts. I can't keep the money. 9 words. She said them quietly, facing slightly away from the security camera mounted above the register. Same voice she used to ask if he wanted pie. Warm, controlled, completely professional. Ruben Cross had spent 22 years on Nevada highways learning to hear the sentence underneath the sentence. He had pulled people from rolled vehicles at 3 in the morning and held their hands while they described what had happened, and he had noticed which details they remembered with precision and which ones they skipped. He knew the difference between a woman who didn't understand what was being done to her and a woman who understood it exactly, who had been counting it in her head for years and had simply run out of people who could hear it. This was the second kind. He didn't reach for a notebook. He picked up his pen. He turned the Nevada road map over to the blank side and set it on the table between them, flat and ordinary, the way a man sets down a piece of paper when he's working through something. He wrote one word, everything. Then he said 8. Start from the beginning. I've got the time. Her name was Deborah Ann Pruitt. Deb on the name tag. She had worn this same mustard yellow uniform for 2 years and 4 months. The collar was fraying at the right edge. She hadn't replaced it. Replacement uniforms cost $11, and $11 was more than 1/6 of what she had access to each week. That was the number that ran her life now. $60. Not 60 in addition to something. Not 60 spending money on top of her wages. $60 total each week, from wages that ran $680 to $720 before her husband took them. She had been doing this particular math for 3 years. By now, she could run it in the time it took to refill a coffee cup. The AC unit above the counter cycled on. The particular rattle of an aging desert air conditioner finding its rhythm, a sound Deb knew the way you know the sounds of a room you've spent thousands of hours inside. It had become part of how she measured time. The cycling of that unit, the opening of the front door, the 4 p.m. check-in. Deb was 34 years old. She had moved to Winnemucca from Reno 3 years ago because her husband Clifford said they needed a fresh start. And she had believed him, not because she was naive, because he had been steady and employed and organized about it, the kind of man who had reasons for things and could explain them clearly. Reno had the wrong associations, he said. Winnemucca was cheaper, quieter, better positioned for the contracting work he was developing. He had a spreadsheet. He had a timeline. He had a plan. 4 months in, he lost his third job in 8 months. And the plan became something else entirely. The month the job stopped was the month the spreadsheet changed. Clifford sat her down at the kitchen table one evening and placed it in front of her. Itemized. Formatted. Rent, utilities, car payments, groceries, incidentals. A total at the bottom. $31,400. Shared household debt, he called it. She had not agreed to accumulate $31,400 of debt. Most of those entries were things she hadn't seen before. But the spreadsheet was detailed. Clifford was calm. And when a calm, organized man places documentation in front of you and explains that this is the reality of your shared situation, it is harder than it sounds to look at that and say, I don't believe this is real. That spreadsheet had followed her for 3 years. If you've lived long enough, you've probably seen money used that way. Not as a resource, as a tether. The amount almost doesn't matter. What matters is that leaving means owing, and owing means staying, and staying means the number grows. Deb's wages went directly to Clifford. He managed the accounts. He gave her $60 a week, which he called an allowance, and which he framed, always calmly, always with the logic of a reasonable man, as the responsible way to manage a shared debt they were working to pay down together. Every shift, before she pocketed her tips, she photographed them on her phone. Quick. Practiced. A woman who has learned to account for every dollar she touches moves a certain way. Gary, the shift manager, had watched her do it for 2 years, from behind the counter, without once asking why. The AC cycled again. The 2 truckers at the counter finished their coffee and pulled on their jackets. The elderly couple at the window booth was working through their pee. Outside, through the glass, the Nevada desert sat white and broad under the afternoon sun, the kind of light that made everything look exposed and nowhere to hide. The Silver Sage Diner looked, from the outside, like rest, a place to stop on a long drive. Pie warming in the case, country radio low, linoleum floor smelling faintly of industrial cleaner, the particular quiet of a half-empty highway diner at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Nothing about it looked like what it was. But the woman in the mustard-yellow uniform had not rested here in 2 years and 4 months. She had been working doubles 5 days a week, handing those wages to a man who drove by twice per shift, always framing it as checking on his wife, the way a devoted husband would, to verify, through the device on her wrist, that she had not gone anywhere he hadn't approved. She hadn't, in 3 years, gone anywhere he hadn't approved. Not because she had nowhere to go, because her ID was in his truck console, her driver's license, her social security card, her marriage certificate. Clifford kept them there, he said, for safekeeping. She was always losing things, he said. He was always there when she needed them, he said. She had not had an unsupervised copy of her own identity documents in 18 months. People outside these situations sometimes ask the obvious question, why didn't she just leave? And the answer is entirely practical. Without ID, you cannot rent an apartment. You cannot open a bank account. You cannot prove you live where you live. You become, legally and administratively, a person whose existence exists only in someone else's files. She had tried 4 times anyway. 14 months ago, she had called the non-emergency line after Clifford locked the house from the outside for 3 days. An officer came. Clifford met him at the door. Calm, organized, the reasonable man he performed so well. He explained that Deb had been having a difficult time. The officer, perhaps understandably, chose the explanation that required less of him. He left a domestic violence pamphlet on the kitchen counter and drove away. The pamphlet was still on the counter the next morning. Clifford had left it there. 8 months ago, she had told Gary. Her shift manager, 52 years old, 6 years at the Silver Sage, the one person who saw her every day. She had told him she needed help leaving. Gary had said, "Deb, I can't get involved in marriage stuff." He had changed the subject. He had not brought it up again. 5 months ago, she had used the diner's back-office computer to email a domestic violence resource center in Elko. She'd received an auto-reply with a hotline number. No human contact, no follow-up. Clifford had found the browser history that evening. She had not used the work computer since. 3 months ago, at a church fundraiser Clifford brought her to in order to maintain appearances, 3 women from the Women's Auxiliary had noticed the tracker wristband and asked about it warmly. Clifford answered for her before she could speak. She has a heart condition. It monitors her vitals. The women had smiled at Deb with sympathy. One had said, "Oh, how wonderful that your husband takes such good care of you, dear. You're a lucky woman." 3 women looked directly at the tracker and chose the husband's explanation over the wife's eyes. That was the 4th attempt. 4 doors, 4 walls. What he didn't know yet was what she had in her apron pocket. Reuben sat at the corner table with the map between them and the blank side facing up. He had been on the road since 6 a.m. He had stopped because the pie looked good and the AC was cold, and because Janet had always said the best conversations in Nevada happened at diner counters. He was still, after 9 years, working on believing she was right. He was looking at Deb the way a man looks when he has stopped assessing and started seeing. "Your documents," he said. "He has your ID." "Truck console," she said. "License, social security card, marriage certificate. He says it's for safekeeping." She said the last 2 words the way a person says a phrase they have heard so many times, it has lost all its original meaning. Reuben wrote on the map, "Docs, truck console." "The tracker," he said. "Real-time location?" "Yes. If I leave a 3/10 of a mile radius around this building during a shift, he gets an alert on his phone." He wrote, "GPS, 0.3 miles alert. 4 p.m. check-in. $60 per week. Debt, $31,400. ID, truck, 97 minutes. He looked at what he had written. Then he looked at the door. He stood up. He pulled 2 20s from his wallet and set them on the table, more than the bill, without ceremony. The way a man leaves a tip. The camera above the register would see exactly that. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "Same tables, same pace. His check-in app sees you stationary inside this building." "That's fine. I'm going outside for 8 minutes. When I come back, I'll order the pie and we'll finish this. Can you hold that?" She looked at him without expression. "I've been holding it for 3 years." He held her gaze for 1 second. "I know." He went outside. The parking lot of the Silver Sage was empty except for the trucker's rigs and his own bike, a Washoe County chapter patch on the riding jacket he'd left folded over the seat. 84 degrees and the particular flatness of high desert in late March, the kind of bright that made it hard to look at anything directly. Reuben pulled his phone from his jacket. He dialed without looking at the number. 9 years of calling it meant his hands knew the way. It rang once. Ironsides. It's Halftone. I need every brother within 2 hours of Winnemucca at the Silver Sage on Highway 80. Now. A pause. Not hesitation. The specific pause of a man running a fast calculation. What's going on? Woman's been working a debt trap inside a legal marriage for 3 years. He controls her documents, her wages, her location. Check in at 4. We are not waiting for Humboldt County to process the paperwork on this one. Half a second. Say no more. We're coming. The line went dead. No argument. No questions about evidence. No discussion of liability or what the club was walking into. Just, we're coming. Because that was what it meant. Not a slogan on a patch, but the actual operational meaning of the word brotherhood in a place and a situation where the official channels had run 4 of their standard non-responses, and a woman was still standing inside a 3/10 of a mile invisible fence. Reuben went back inside and ordered the cherry pie. Stetson. Ironside Vance was 55 years old and ran the Washoe County chapter the way a man runs something he has built over 30 years and intends to be proud of. He could read a Nevada trafficking statute the way most men read a street sign, instantly and knowing exactly where it led. When Reuben said, debt trap inside a legal marriage, Ironside had already located the relevant federal coercion provisions in his memory before the sentence was finished. He made 3 calls in 4 minutes. The first was to a man they called Tombstone. 58. 14 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division out of Las Vegas. Tombstone had dismantled fabricated debt structures the way other men drank coffee, routinely, efficiently, and before noon. Clifford Marsh's $31,000 spreadsheet was, to Tombstone, a Tuesday afternoon. The second was to Copperhead. 47. 12 years as a Nevada domestic violence advocate before he came back to the chapter. Copperhead knew which emergency court order applied when a victim's documents were physically held by the perpetrator. He knew the judge's clerk in Humboldt County. He had filed emergency property release motions before the ink was dry on the incident report. The third was to Dust Cloud, 36, whose contact in Reno understood GPS monitoring devices at the component level, including how to neutralize a locator signal from a wristband without triggering the receiving end alert. A fourth call, to a club elder named Knotwood, 62, would come later after Ironside heard everything. Knotwood would drive directly to Elko, but that was later. Right now it was 2:31 p.m., and there were 89 minutes left. When Reuben sat back down, the cherry pie was at the edge of the table, and Deb was refilling the trucker's coffee at the counter. Same pace, same professional warmth, nothing on the diner camera registering as unusual. She came back to his corner table 2 minutes later with a pot she didn't need to bring. "What haven't you told me?" he said. She looked at the counter. Gary was wiping it down with his back turned. 11 days ago, she said. She told him about the phone call. Saturday night, 11:38 p.m. She had gone to the kitchen for tea. Clifford thought she was asleep. She had stood in the doorway and listened to his side of a conversation for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. She knew the number because she had counted. 3 minutes and 17 seconds of standing perfectly still, while a man she was legally married to told someone she could not see that he had another 8 months before she became a problem. That there was a woman in Elko he was already working on. That the same thing that happened to the last one would happen to her. She would leave. He would keep the debt. She couldn't prove anything. The last one. Reuben set his pen down. He had seen a lot of things in 22 years. Accidents and lies, and the specific cruelty of people who hurt others because they could. He had learned, over time, to file most of it in the place where professionals file the things that cannot be unfiled, somewhere that didn't interfere with functioning. But there was one thing that had never fully gone into that place. His wife Janet had died at 44. An illness that was treatable if caught and addressed. The insurance company had denied the claim, reviewed it, appealed it, reviewed the appeal for 14 months. 14 months of forms filed in the right order and phone numbers called and representatives who said the process was ongoing. Janet had gotten worse while the process was ongoing. She had died while the process was ongoing. He had spent 22 years on Nevada highways noticing things that other people drove past. And 9 years after that, he had spent a lot of time thinking about what noticing was actually for, what it obligated you to once you had done it. His wife Janet had died waiting for an insurance appeal to resolve. Treatable illness. 14 months of correct paperwork filed in the correct order. She had gotten worse while the process was ongoing. She had died while the process was ongoing. He knew what it looked like when a system ran out of time. He was looking at it again. He said, 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Yes, she said. You counted. I count everything. He looked at her for one moment. Not with pity. With the recognition of one person who has learned to survive by precision for a man who has learned the same thing a different way. Then she reached into her apron pocket. She placed a folded diner order ticket on the road map between them. Written on the back, in ballpoint pen, in the tight compressed handwriting of someone who wrote quickly in a small dark space. The date, the time, his words exactly. 8 months, Elko, same thing that happened to the last one. The name Warren, and the number $600. I wrote it in the walk-in cooler, she said. On my break, that night. It's the only place in this building without a camera. Reuben looked at the ticket. He looked at the name. Warren, he said. Who is he? Local, Winnemucca. He's been at 3 of the dinners. She said the word dinners the way a person says a word for something that stopped being what the word meant a long time ago. Reuben wrote, Warren, local, 3 dinners, Venmo/Cash App? He did not ask the last part out loud. He would find out. He folded the road map with the order ticket inside it and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at the tracker on her wrist. That comes off today. I know someone in Winnemucca who won't ask the wrong questions. Something moved across her face. Not relief. Not yet. But the specific release of a weight that has been carried alone for 11 days, now shared with someone who had the shoulders for it. There was a last one, Reuben said. He said, same thing that happened to the last one. What do you know about her? Deb sat down. First time during the whole conversation she had sat. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she told him about Sandra. Here is what the arrival of 52 motorcycles on Highway 80 was going to look like to Winnemucca that afternoon. Not chaos. Not the version in the movies, the one where the bikes roar in and fists meet pavement and something burns. 52 motorcycles, parked in disciplined rows on the Highway 80 shoulder between the Silver Sage and the edge of town. Engines off. Nobody shouting, nobody blocking traffic. Just present. The way a wall is present. The way a fact is present. Ironside had learned, over 30 years, that the loudest thing a large group of men could do in a situation like this was nothing at all. The law requires an action to respond to. Presence requires only acknowledgement. Clifford Marsh would drive his Ram 1500 toward the Silver Sage at 3:47 p.m. From the moment he hit the on-ramp, he would have an unobstructed view of 52 motorcycles and the men sitting on them. But that was 71 minutes away. Right now, at 2:38 p.m., Reuben Cross was eating cherry pie at a corner table in a Nevada highway diner, with a road map in his jacket pocket and a phone call already in motion, listening to a woman describe what she had heard through a kitchen doorway 11 days ago. And Gary Simmons, 52 years old, shift manager, Silver Sage, was wiping down the counter with his back turned, trying very hard not to think about what he had been watching from that counter for 2 years. He had a feeling, building steadily since about 2:20 p.m., that today was the day he was going to have to decide what kind of man he actually was. By 3:14 p.m., the first bikes were already on Highway 80 heading east out of Reno. You might be picturing what that usually looks like in the stories people tell about Hell's Angels. The roar building toward something violent, the leather and the noise as a prelude to a confrontation. That's the version that fits the box most people have in their head when they hear the name. That is not what was coming down Highway 80 that Tuesday afternoon. What was coming was 52 men who had ridden together long enough that they didn't need to discuss what they were doing or why. No questions about evidence, no debate about jurisdiction, no conversation about whether this was their business. Reuben had called. A woman had been held inside a legal marriage for 3 years by a man who had engineered her life so thoroughly that she couldn't prove she lived where she lived. That was enough. The formation pulled onto the highway in disciplined rows, Washoe County chapter in front, Humboldt County riders falling in behind, the thunder of the engines building low and steady, the way weather builds out here in the high desert. Something you feel before you fully hear it. Chrome catching the late afternoon Nevada sun. The particular sound of 52 Harleys in formation. Not a roar, not chaos. Something older than that. Something that sounded like consequence. By 3:41 p.m., the first riders were parking on the Highway 80 shoulder west of the Silver Sage. Engines cut one by one until only the wind was left. 52 men. Not a protest. Not a mob. A fact placed on a highway for a man in a Ram 1500 to read at whatever speed he chose to approach it. Inside the diner, the AC cycled. The country radio played something about a woman who stayed too long, and a man who never deserved her. Deb was behind the counter, same pace, same warmth, same practiced smile. Reuben was at the corner table. He had finished the cherry pie. He was reading the road map without looking at it. His phone showed 3:43 p.m. 17 minutes before Clifford's check-in. The man they called Dust Cloud came in first. 36 years old. A face that gave nothing away, and eyes that missed nothing. He sat down at the booth nearest the door and ordered coffee. When Deb brought it, Dust Cloud set his hand flat on the table. Under his palm, a small black device, roughly the same dimensions as a pack of matches. He looked at her wrist. He said 6 words. very quiet. I can have that off in 30 seconds. The signal replicates for another 3 hours before it drops. He'll see you stationary in this building until 6. She looked at the device, then at him. 3 hours. Long enough, he said. Long enough for everything that needed to happen before Clifford understood that it already had. She sat down across from him. He worked quickly, professionally. The calm of someone who has done this before and understands that speed, here, is a form of kindness. The wristband came off. The replicator was attached. She pulled her sleeve down over the small device. For the first time in 18 months, her wrist was her own. She looked at it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. When she stood up, she was standing the same way she had stood for the last 3 years. Efficient, controlled, nothing on the camera registering as different. But something in the set of her jaw had changed by a fraction that anyone who had been watching her as long as Gary Simmons had would have noticed. Gary noticed. He had been noticing things for a long time. The man they called Spectre was 43. He had the particular quality of someone who doesn't need the room to know he's in it. He sat down at the counter near Gary about 10 minutes after Dust Cloud arrived, ordered coffee and the house sandwich, and said nothing for a while. Gary wiped the counter. He had been wiping the counter for about 20 minutes longer than it required wiping. "You've been watching her photograph her tips since before the year turned," Spectre said. Gary's hand stilled on the counter. "Every shift," Spectre said. "Same motion. She takes them to the back and photographs them before she pockets them. You know why she does that?" Gary set the rag down. He was 52 years old. He had worked at the Silver Sage for 6 years. He had known, with the specific knowledge of a man who doesn't want to know, that something was wrong with Deb Pruitt's situation for a long time. He had told himself it was marriage stuff. He had told himself it wasn't his place. He had told himself Clifford was friendly enough when he came by, the kind of guy who made it easy to accept the surface explanation. He had also told himself, 3 weeks after Deb came to him 8 months ago, that he had probably made the right call by not getting involved. "She came to me," Gary said. His voice was low. 8 months ago. She said she needed help leaving. I told her I couldn't get involved in marriage stuff." He stopped. Clifford came by 2 days later. Brought me a case of Coors. Said Deb had been going through a rough patch, that she sometimes said things, that she needed stability, not people encouraging her to be impulsive. He picked up the rag, put it back down. "I let him do that," Gary said. "He came in here and told me how to think about what she'd said, and I let him." Spectre drank his coffee. He didn't offer Gary absolution. He didn't tell him it wasn't his fault, or that he'd understand someday. He was quiet, in the way that respected a person's intelligence enough to let them sit with a true thing. "She wrote something down 11 days ago," Spectre finally said. "She wrote down what she heard, and she kept it, and today she gave it to someone who could use it. She did that. Not any of us." He paused. "But you've been watching her count tips for 2 years, and what you know matters. So I'm going to ask you to think about what you've seen, and then I'm going to need you to tell it to some people who are going to ask you officially." Gary looked at the counter for a long time. "He told her he couldn't keep her key," he said. "About 14 months back. She asked me once if there was a way to get a copy made without—" He stopped. "I said I couldn't get involved." "What else?" "The dinners. She'd come in some mornings after a Wednesday or a Thursday dinner, and she'd be not hurt. Not anything you could point to. Just smaller. Like there was less of her than the day before." Gary's jaw tightened. I told myself I didn't know what that meant. He looked at Spectre. I knew what that meant. Spectre set his coffee down. There's a federal investigator who's going to want to hear that. Every piece of what you just said is a piece of something larger. What you noticed counts. What you saw counts. The fact that he came in and managed you, that counts too. Gary didn't say anything else for a moment. Then, is she safe? Spectre looked past him toward the counter, where Deb was pouring coffee for the elderly couple at the window booth. She will be, he said. That's what today is. At 3:47 p.m., Clifford Marsh's Ram 1500 turned onto the Highway 80 on-ramp. The Humboldt County chapter had staged themselves first. 21 bikes in even rows on the shoulder, engines off, the men sitting or standing, not blocking the road, not making noise. Behind them, the Washoe County chapter filled in the picture. 52 motorcycles in total, the kind of presence that doesn't require explanation. Clifford's truck slowed as he came up the ramp. He would have seen the bikes from 200 yards out. He would have noted the patches, the specific insignia he had spent 3 years in Winnemucca, knowing enough about to be careful of. He would have looked toward the Silver Sage lot and seen a bike he didn't recognize parked near the door, and a second, and a third. The tracker app on his phone showed Deb stationary inside the building. The reading was exactly what it should have been. But 52 motorcycles on a highway between him and his wife's diner had a meaning that no app reading could explain away. He sat at the base of the on-ramp for 40 seconds. Then he pulled the truck to the shoulder. He did not turn in. Inside, Reuben's phone buzzed. A single word from Ironside. Stopped. Reuben looked up from the map. He looked at Deb, who was refilling the trucker's coffee for what would be the last time that shift, her sleeve down over the replicator, her name tag reading D.E.B. in block letters, her collar still frayed at the right edge. She met his eyes across the diner. He gave one small nod. Something moved across her face. Not celebration. Not relief, exactly. The thing that comes when a calculation you have been running for 3 years, exhausting, precise, relentless, finally resolves. The specific stillness of a number that finally adds up. Copperhead arrived at 14 Sagebrush Court at 3:52 p.m. He had made one call from the road to a clerk in the Humboldt County District Court who had processed emergency property release motions before and knew what they covered when a victim's identification documents were physically held by a third party. The motion had been drafted in the car. It had the specific language that worked, the kind built from 12 years of Copperhead, knowing the difference between legal language that moves and legal language that stalls. The emergency order covered Deb's driver's license, social security card, and marriage certificate. It identified the vehicle, Clifford's Ram 1500, Nevada license plate, registered to Clifford Wayne Marsh, and the location, the locked console. The truck was on the Highway 80 shoulder, engine running, driver inside. Copperhead was not there to search the truck. He was there to present the order. He pulled up behind the Ram, got out, and walked to the driver's window. Clifford Marsh saw the patch. He saw the document. He looked in his rearview mirror at the empty road behind them and the 52 bikes visible in the mid-distance, and did the arithmetic that a man of his particular skill set, the calculation of what he could get away with and what he couldn't, does very quickly. He opened the console. He handed over 3 documents. Deb's license, her social security card, Her marriage certificate. "This isn't over," Clifford said. Copperhead looked at the documents. He looked at Clifford with the particular patience of someone who has been doing this for 12 years and has seen what "this isn't over" costs people who say it. "You're right," Copperhead said. "It isn't." He walked back to his bike. Now. What he didn't know yet was what Tombstone had found in the last 40 minutes. Tombstone was 58 years old and had spent 14 years at the FBI's Las Vegas Financial Crimes Division doing one thing: following money to where it told the truth. He had been on the road since Ironside's call at 2:34 p.m., and by the time he sat down across from Reuben at the Silver Sage at 4:11 p.m., he had 3 documents open on his phone. He set the phone on the table between them. "The debt spreadsheet," he said. $31,400. Roughly 14,200 of those entries are fabricated. Non-existent expenses, formatted to look real. He paused. "The remaining 17,200? Legitimate household costs. Costs Deb paid with her own wages." Reuben looked at the number. He thought about $60 a week. He thought about 3 years of doubles at a highway diner. He thought about a woman photographing her tips before she pocketed them because she had learned, somewhere along the way, that everything she touched would be audited. "The debt she's been told she owes him," he said, "is almost half fiction," Tombstone said, "and the real half she already paid." He slid to the next screen. Venmo and Cash App. 6 recurring contacts over 18 months. Payments to Clifford Marsh ranging from $400 to $800 per transaction. He looked at Reuben. Total across all 6 contacts, $87,300. The number sat there. $87,300. In 18 months. From a man with no documented employment, no business registration, no tax filings. From a man whose wife was living on $60 a week from her own wages while he built what amounted to a 6-figure annual income from her existence. Reuben said nothing for a moment. Then, "Sandra Pratt." He had told Ironside about Sandra on the phone at 2:31. One sentence, previous girlfriend, Reno, dropped a civil claim in 2021. Ironside had given it to Tombstone before the bikes left Washoe County. Tombstone slid a second screen up. "Sandra Lynn Pratt," he said, "currently of Phoenix, Arizona. A civil claim filed in 2021 against Clifford Marsh for unauthorized joint account access. $22,800 withdrawn over 18 months in cash." He looked at the screen. Her attorney advised her the case was too costly to pursue. She dropped it. "What does the pattern look like?" Reuben said. "Identical. Isolation within months of relationship start. Financial control through joint account she couldn't access independently. Described to mutual contacts and to Clifford's own social network as fragile, struggling, difficult." Tombstone set the phone down. She was 29 when the relationship ended. He moved to Winnemucca 6 weeks later. Within 3 months, he had met Deb. Nobody spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle idled and cut off. Every man at that table understood, without saying it, that this was not a man who had learned bad habits inside one marriage. This was a method. Built, tested, and run twice. And there was a woman in Elko he was already working on for a 3rd time. "Knotwood," Reuben said. Ironside, who had been sitting across the room since 4:03, picked up his phone. Knotwood was 62. He didn't say much, and he drove fast, And he had the particular quality of a man who understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was be physically present in the right place before someone else was ready. He was already on the road to Elko. He didn't know the Elko woman's name yet, neither did anyone else. But she was in a new relationship with a man named Clifford Marsh, who had a spreadsheet and a timeline and a plan, and she was approximately 3 months in, which was 1 month before the spreadsheet usually came out, and Knotwood was going to be in Elko before sunset. Now, Warren Delgado, 44 years old, Winnemucca, his name on the order ticket, his face at 3 dinners, his Venmo ID on 12 of the $87,000. Warren was not a predator. This is important to understand because it changes what he was. A predator understands what they're doing and proceeds anyway. Warren Delgado had spent 18 months telling himself that the arrangements he participated in were between consenting adults, that Clifford had explained the situation as Deb being a willing partner in a social arrangement that helped pay down joint household debt, that the money he sent was for companionship and networking, that the whole thing was, he had actually used this word to himself, sophisticated. He had told himself this through 12 cash app payments, and 3 evenings, and at least 1 moment at the end of the second dinner when Deb had looked at him with dark, efficient eyes, and he had thought, she didn't choose to be here. He had sent the payment anyway. Ironside came to Warren's house at 4:30 p.m. Not with noise, just the knock, the patch, and the documents laid out on Warren's kitchen table, one at a time. The Venmo records, the Cash App history, the amount, the dates, the order ticket with his name on it. Warren looked at the order ticket. He looked at the total. $87,300. His portion. All of it. He looked at Ironside. I didn't know it was... I thought she was... Clifford said. Ironside was quiet for a moment. Then, tell me everything, from the beginning. Or I make one call and you answer to people with considerably less patience than I have right now. Warren broke in approximately 4 minutes. The coward always breaks fastest. Not because they're weaker, because they have less invested in the story. The predator has built his life on the narrative. The coward has just been borrowing it. Warren told them 5 other contacts, 3 from Winnemucca, 2 from Lovelock. A pattern going back 20 months. 3 of them had been to multiple dinners. 1 of them had made a comment to Clifford, at some point in the last 6 months, that Deb seemed tired, and Clifford had responded by scheduling 2 additional dinners the following week. Warren had not asked why. He had told himself that wasn't his business. He had told himself a lot of things that were not his business. When Ironside stood up from Warren's kitchen table, he looked at the man across from him. A man sitting in his own house with his hands flat on the table, staring at the numbers, seeing perhaps for the first time what the numbers actually represented. And he felt the heaviness that comes with this part. Not anger. Something slower. The villain was easy to understand. A predator makes a calculation, an evil calculation, a human one, the kind the law was built to stop. But this man was different. This was a man who had seen the thing clearly enough on at least 1 occasion, and had looked away. Who had paid 12 times. Who had available to him, at any of those moments, the simple choice to stop. He had chosen not to stop. 12 times. Ironside left Warren sitting at his kitchen table with a specific instruction. An FBI agent would be calling in the next 2 hours, and Warren's continued cooperation was the only thing separating him from being named as a participating party in a federal trafficking operation. Warren understood. The FBI agent's name was Renata Solis, 41, out of the Reno field office, dark circles that coffee had stopped touching about a month ago. She arrived at the Silver Sage at 5:07 p.m. in plain clothes, parked in the lot, and walked past 52 motorcycles without changing her pace. She found Ironside and Reuben at the corner table, Reuben's table, the road map still on the surface. She said her name and her office. 2 sentences. Reuben nodded. "I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation," she said. "Depends on what you're investigating," Reuben said. She looked at him steadily. "Clifford Wayne Marsh." Reuben looked at Ironside. A decision was made without words. "How long has your office known about Marsh?" Ironside said. The question sat in the air. Agent Solis answered it. 8 months. They had been building a RICO-adjacent coercion case carefully by the book, following every procedural step the federal statute required. Financial subpoenas, warrant applications, the careful architecture of a case that would hold in court. While they built it, Deb Pruitt had been photographing her tips every shift, had been wearing a GPS wristband, had been living on $60 a week from her own wages. Ironside let the answer sit there. "We got her documents back in 3 hours," he said. "You had 8 months." Agent Solis had no good answer to that. She didn't try to manufacture one. She had sat across from enough people on both sides of situations like this to know that the absence of a good answer sometimes was the good answer. Reuben laid the evidence on the table, one piece at a time. The order ticket. Read it. Clifford's words, Deb's handwriting, the date, the name Warren, the number $600. The Venmo and Cash App records. $87,300. 18 months, 6 contacts, 12 recurring payments, one name that appeared 4 times, Sandra Pratt's civil claim from 2021. The $22,800. The identical isolation pattern. The identical financial control structure, the identical language used to describe her to outsiders, fragile, struggling, confused. Tombstone placed each document on the table with the steady hands of a man who has done this in rooms with considerably higher stakes. Agent Solis stopped writing after the 3rd item. She set her pen down. She leaned forward. She looked at the Venmo records. "We had the financial trail from his end," she said quietly. "We didn't have the recipient side of the transactions. Without those," she stopped, looked at Tombstone. "If this is authenticated, the coercion charge becomes trafficking under Title 18. The scope of this changes significantly." Reuben waited until she finished. "One condition," he said. She looked at him. "Deb gets a victim advocate assigned before any federal interview. Nobody talks to her without her asking first. And Sandra Pratt in Phoenix gets a call today, not next week, about reopening her civil claim with this as supporting evidence." Agent Solis looked at him for a moment. "I can do that," she said. "Good." She stood, gathered her notes, paused at the table edge. "Mr. Cross," she said. Reuben looked up. "You do right by her," he said. She held his gaze for one beat. "That's the job," she said. She walked out. The system was not broken. That was the thing that was easy to get wrong when you looked at what had happened to Deb Pruitt over 3 years and 4 attempts and 1 pamphlet left on a counter. It felt like a broken system. But a broken system could be identified and repaired. This one had worked exactly the way it was designed to work. Slowly, requiring documented proof, following procedure, protecting the rights of the accused through every step while the victim ran out of time and options. Nobody built it to hurt people. It just turned out that way sometimes, when the person inside it needed to be moved faster than the paperwork could catch up. The brothers hadn't replaced the system. They'd bought the 3 hours the system needed to work. Clifford Marsh was still on the Highway 80 shoulder at 5:23 p.m. when 2 Winnemucca PD units pulled up behind the Ram 1500. He was on his phone when they arrived. His attorney, probably, or trying to reach Warren Delgado, who was not answering. The window was down. He had the radio on. Something country and old. He looked up when the officers approached his window with the resigned expression of a man who has spent 3 years calculating his way out of everything and has, until this moment, always found the exit. He started to speak. He was good at starting to speak. Deb had once told Reuben in the diner that Clifford could make a reasonable case for almost anything in the first 60 seconds. That was the skill. The first 60 seconds, before the details caught up. His shoulders dropped from defensive to open, palms up on the steering wheel, the practiced gesture of a man with nothing to hide, performed by a man with everything to hide. "Officer, I think there's a misunderstanding here," he said. His voice was warm, slightly self-deprecating, the voice of a reasonable man who was mildly inconvenienced but understood that these things happened. "My wife and I have been going through a difficult time. I think you probably know that stress in a marriage can lead to people saying things. Deb struggles. I've been trying to support her. I'm sure the gentleman who called you is well-intentioned, but if you talk to anyone in this community, my neighbors, the people I volunteer with, the families I've worked with at the church, they'll tell you exactly who I am." He smiled. Clean. Practiced. The smile of a man who had used it 100 times and had 100 times been believed. Copperhead, standing at the window, said nothing. Reuben had briefed him on one question, one specific question that no charming answer could handle, a detail from the order ticket that only Clifford knew the real answer to. "Warren Delgado," Copperhead said. "You received $600 from him on the 14th of last month. What was that for?" 1 second. The shoulders didn't drop. They stilled. The smile stayed on his face, the way a smile stays when the person wearing it has forgotten to take it off, because they're no longer paying attention to it. 1 second was enough. "Step out of the vehicle, please," the officer said. Then, it didn't. The mask came off the way it always does eventually, not with drama, not with a speech, just with the sudden stillness that follows when all the strategies have failed and there is nothing left performing. His hands, which had been open and relaxed and reasonable, tightened on the steering wheel. His jaw set. The eyes went flat. "I was so careful," he said. He said it quietly, not to the officers, to the steering wheel or to himself. "I was so careful." He got out of the vehicle. They read him his rights there on the Highway 80 shoulder, the late Nevada sun going orange across the desert, the silver sage flatlands stretching out to where the mountains started in the west. He kept his face composed through the reading, the professional composure of a man who had managed every social situation for 3 years. His hands were behind his back. Then, as one officer walked him toward the unit, Clifford stopped and turned his head. "Is there anyone who can feed my dog?" he said. While this gets sorted out, he needs to eat at 6. The officer waited. The dog, Clifford said. He can't miss his dinner. As if that were the thing that required attention. As if the world he had built, and the world he had taken apart, could pause while he sorted out the dog. The charges, filed federally before dark. Forced labor under Title 18, Section 1589. Trafficking by coercion, Section 1591. Financial fraud, $14,200 in fabricated debt entries. Document confiscation. And, pending Sandra Pratt's cooperation from Phoenix, a second trafficking count, extending the timeline by 2 additional years. Bail was set at a number that reflected, accurately, the fact that this was a man who had access to $87,000 in unreported cash income, and no moral center that had ever slowed him down. He did not make bail. At 5:41 p.m., Reuben Cross sat alone at the corner table. The diner was quiet. The truckers had paid and gone. Gary Simmons was standing near the register, not wiping anything. The elderly couple at the window booth had left a few minutes ago, and the woman had stopped on her way out and looked at Deb, who was standing behind the counter holding her own documents for the first time in 18 months, and said something Reuben couldn't hear from across the room. Deb had looked down at the license in her hand. Then she had looked at the woman and nodded. The full scope of what the next 72 hours would reveal was still assembling itself. 5 other contacts to be identified. 3 from Winnemucca, 2 from Lovelock. A financial operation that had run for at minimum 20 months. Sandra Pratt in Phoenix, who would receive a call this evening from Agent Solis, and who would pick up on the second ring and who would say yes before the sentence was finished, because she had been waiting 3 years for someone to call who could actually do something with what she knew. And somewhere in Elko, a woman in a relationship with Clifford Marsh that was approximately 4 months old was about to open her door and find a 62-year-old man who had driven 2 hours to tell her something she was going to want to know before the spreadsheet appeared. The scope would come out in full over 3 days. When it did, it would look like this. 6 victims identified across 2 states, covering a period of 5 years. Total funds trafficked and fraudulently extracted. Approximately $161,000. Clifford Marsh's total documented income from employment in the same period. 0. He had been doing this for 5 years. It had worked every time, until a retired Nevada Highway Patrol officer ordered cherry pie at a highway diner and noticed a sleeve pulled too long for 84-degree weather. The charges, when the federal count was finalized, ran to 6: forced labor, trafficking by coercion, financial fraud, document confiscation, conspiracy. Clifford and 3 of the 6 contacts were charged jointly. And in a separate count that covered Sandra Pratt's case retroactively, 1 additional trafficking charge that extended the government's timeline from 18 months to 5 years. The debt spreadsheet, the $31,400 that had held Deb in place for 3 years, was forensically dismantled in 11 minutes by a man named Tombstone, who had seen this particular mechanism before and knew exactly which entries to pull. The actual amount Deb owed Clifford Marsh, according to independent forensic accounting, was 0. She had, in fact, overpaid the legitimate household costs by approximately $14,000 across 3 years of wages at $60 a week. The first safe meal was a grilled cheese sandwich. Not planned, not ceremonial. Copperhead had driven Deb from the Silver Sage to a woman named Loretta Briggs, 58, retired emergency nurse, Winnemucca, whose house sat on a quiet street 3 blocks from the highway, and who had, over 7 years of quiet collaboration with the Washoe County chapter, become the person they called when they needed somewhere for someone to land softly. Loretta had met them at the door, taken one look at Deb, and gone directly to the kitchen. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, a glass of water with ice, no lemon, because Loretta had noticed, in 30 years of nursing and 7 years of this work, that people who had been controlled down to the smallest details sometimes needed the first choices to be uncomplicated. Deb sat at Loretta's kitchen table and ate. No one took the plate away. No timer. No cost attached to the food in her hand. The tomato soup was a little too hot at first, and she waited for it to cool, and nobody said anything about the waiting. Outside the kitchen window, the Nevada evening was settling into that particular deep blue the high desert makes at dusk, the sky going clear and cold above the sage. She ate the sandwich. All of it. She ate the soup. She held the water glass in both hands the way a person holds something warm when they are still not entirely certain of the temperature of the room. Loretta sat at the other end of the table with her own coffee and said almost nothing, because she knew that sometimes silence is what the room needs first, and conversation can come after. Reuben was outside in the front yard, on the phone with Ironside and then with Agent Solis, running through the next 48 hours. Through the kitchen window, Deb could see the shape of him in the dusk, the jacket with the Washoe County patch, the road map folded in his breast pocket. She watched him for a moment. He had been on that highway since 6 a.m. He had stopped for pie and AC. He had looked up once, noticed a sleeve, and everything else had followed from that one moment of actually seeing what was in front of him. She thought about the 4 times before, the pamphlet on the counter, Gary changing the subject, the auto reply from Elko, the 3 women at the church fundraiser who had smiled at her sympathetically and told her she was lucky. She set the water glass down. Think about someone in your life right now, the person you'd want in that kitchen. Not a hero, not someone with a badge or a patch or a title, just someone who would notice the sleeve. Someone who, if you said 9 words that didn't add up, would set their pen down and say, "Start from the beginning. I've got the time." Hold that person in your mind for a moment. We're coming back to them at the end of this story. Then she placed her driver's license on the table in front of her. Just placed it there. Looked at her own face in the small photograph, the version of herself from before the apartment in Reno, before the spreadsheet, before the $60 a week. She looked younger in the photograph than she felt, and older than the number on the card suggested. Loretta glanced at the license. She didn't say anything. "It doesn't look like me anymore," Deb said. Loretta considered this. "No," she said. "It looks like the person you were when it was taken. That's different from who you are now." She sipped her coffee. "Both are real." Deb put the license in her pocket. Her own pocket. Her own document, in her own clothing, going with her wherever she decided to go. She looked out at the yard. Reuben had finished the call. He was standing in the dark of the front yard looking west toward where the mountains were, barely visible now against the last of the light. She thought, He stopped for pie. That was all. He hadn't come looking. He hadn't been sent by anyone. He had stopped because the pie looked good, and an old habit of noticing things was still running 22 years after he'd learned it. And she thought about all the people who had passed through that diner in 3 years and had not noticed, or had noticed and looked away, and how the difference between those two outcomes, noticed versus looked away, was the entire distance between where she sat at 5:47 p.m. on Tuesday and where she had been at 2:17 p.m. Loretta stood up and took the empty plate. She left the water glass. Outside, Reuben turned from the mountains and came back toward the house. The doctor's name was Miriam Castillo, a general practitioner in Winnemucca, 51 years old, who ran a small practice on the east side of town, and who had, over years of working in a rural Nevada county, developed the particular skill of asking the right questions, and none of the wrong ones. Copperhead had called her from the road at 4:15 p.m. She had stayed late. She examined Deb at 6:30 p.m. in a small room that smelled like antiseptic and had a plant in the corner that someone was clearly trying to keep alive. Copperhead sat in the waiting room with a paper cup of coffee and a 6-month-old magazine, reading neither. When Deb came out 40 minutes later, Dr. Castillo was behind her. She looked at Copperhead. She said, "Stress-related weight loss, approximately 12 to 15 pounds over 3 years. Chronic sleep disruption, no acute injury, nothing that rest and regular meals and absence of the stressor won't address over time." She paused. "She needs continuity of care for the next 6 months at minimum. Someone to check in with." She looked at Deb. "You're not fragile," she said. "I want to be clear about that. You're depleted. Those are different things." Deb looked at her. "I know the difference," she said. Dr. Castillo nodded. "Good. Then you also know that depleted recovers. Come back in 2 weeks." Copperhead stood up from the waiting room chair. He handed Deb a card with Dr. Castillo's number on it, and a second card, his own number, written in pen on the back of a folded receipt, which was not the most professional business card in the world, but communicated something the professional version could not. "Any time," he said. He meant it in the specific way that people who have done this kind of work mean it, not as courtesy, as operational fact. The housing solution was Loretta's second bedroom. Furnished, quiet, with a window that faced the backyard, and not the street. A detail that mattered in the first weeks, more than people who have never had to track a vehicle in a rear-view mirror would understand. The chapter had raised $14,000 in 2 days across Washoe and Humboldt counties. This was not a fundraiser. It was 26 members each putting in what they put in and not talking about it, which was the only way the chapter had ever done anything that mattered. The money went into a supervised account, managed jointly by Tombstone and a Winnemucca attorney named Priscilla Okafor, who handled exactly this kind of transition, covering first and last month rent at an apartment on Cedar Street that Deb had signed for on Thursday, the day after the arrest. Priscilla Okafor was 44 years old, had been in family and civil law for 16 years, and had taken one look at Tombstone's forensic accounting report and the debt spreadsheet and said in a very level voice, "The manufactured entries alone are worth a counter-civil action. He filed this debt. He's going to wish he hadn't." She filed the counterclaim on Friday morning. The Cedar Street apartment was 640 square feet. Second floor. A view of a parking lot, and beyond it, a strip of high desert sky that turned remarkable colors at dusk. The building manager was a woman named Paula, who had been briefed enough to know what she needed to know, and had said simply, "She can move in Saturday." On Saturday, Reuben carried 2 boxes up the stairs. Copperhead carried the couch, second-hand, green, bought for $80 from a woman on the next block who was moving to Sacramento. Dust Cloud installed new locks on the door and the window, the kind that required a key from the inside as well as the outside, because that detail mattered in a way that cost $12.45 and was worth both. Deb stood in the doorway of the apartment with the key in her hand. Her own key. Her name on the lease. Her 640 square feet that no one else had a code for, or a claim on, or a GPS alert connected to. She stood there for a moment. Then she walked in. Tombstone sat with Gary Simmons for 2 hours on Wednesday, in a booth at the Silver Sage that Gary had chosen because it was his place, and he was more composed in his own place. Gary told everything he knew. The tip photographs, the morning after dinner look, Clifford managing him with a case of beer, and a conversation about Deb's instability. The 8-month silence after Deb had come to him. The license key request that Gary had deflected 14 months ago. He said all of it without being asked twice. He said it with the specific remorse of a man who has been telling himself a story for a long time and has finally stopped. "Does she know that I'm talking to you?" Gary asked. "She knows," Tombstone said. Gary looked at his hands. "I want to tell her myself. What I should have done. I know it doesn't change anything." "You can write to her," Tombstone said. "Priscilla Okafor handles her correspondence right now. Anything you want to say, send it through the attorney's office. If Deb wants to respond, she will." Gary nodded. He kept nodding slightly for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to absorb something that cannot be fully absorbed at one sitting. He testified to the federal investigators on Thursday morning. His account, 2 years of observations, the specific incidents, the management conversation with Clifford, added 3 new counts to the government's evidentiary record. Not because any single piece was decisive, because corroboration, in a case built on one woman's word against a man who had spent 3 years positioning her as unreliable, was everything. Sandra Pratt called from Phoenix on Wednesday evening. She had not hesitated when Agent Solis called her Tuesday night. She had said yes before the sentence finished, in the voice of a person who had been waiting for this call for years and had almost stopped expecting it. She spoke to Priscilla Okafor for 90 minutes. She had kept everything. Her bank statements, the civil claim documents from 2021, a folder of texts she had screenshot over 3 years of processing what had happened to her after Clifford, sitting with it quietly in Phoenix, while she rebuilt her life with the specific stubborn determination of someone who refuses to let what was done to them be the last word. Her $22,800 had been added to the federal count. Her testimony, submitted in writing to the Humboldt County Federal Court, ran to 12 pages. It described a pattern identical to Deb's in its structure and different in its surface details. Different names, different city, different cover stories, and identical where it mattered. The escalation, the financial isolation, the documents managed, the social network quietly dismantled until she was standing in a life she no longer recognized as her own. She ended the testimony with one paragraph that the prosecuting attorney would read aloud at trial. It said, "I dropped the civil claim because I was alone and exhausted, and I had been told, in various ways, that I could not prove what I knew to be true. I want the record to show that I knew. I knew from the first month what he was. I knew, and I had nobody to tell who could do anything with it. The first time, I was glad to hear someone finally could. Nora Castillo, Sandra's best friend in Reno, 38, who had watched Clifford Marsh isolate Sandra for 14 months and had never once been asked what she saw, received a call from Agent Solis on Thursday morning. She answered with, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me this for 4 years." Her testimony added the social isolation pattern to the record in a way that corroborated both Sandra and Deb's accounts simultaneously. She described watching Sandra's social world contract, month by month, like water drying from a surface. She described Clifford's specific technique. The gradual reframing of Sandra's friends as bad influences, users, people who didn't really care about her, delivered so calmly and with such apparent concern that it had taken Nora months to recognize it as a campaign. "He was very good at it," she said. "That's the thing people don't understand. He was very good. He sounded like someone who loved her when he talked about her. He sounded worried, protective." She paused. "That's why it worked." Warren Delgado cooperated fully. He named all 5 other contacts. He provided his complete transaction history. He did not make excuses in the deposition, which surprised the federal investigators slightly, until they understood that Warren's particular variety of moral failure was not one that had been built on a self-exonerating narrative. He had known. He had continued. He had no story to tell himself about it that held up under the particular pressure of seeing the full accounting laid out on a federal table. He was charged as a participating party. His attorney negotiated reduced charges in exchange for cooperation and full restitution to a fund managed by Priscilla Okafor. Warren did not contest the restitution. The 3 contacts from Winnemucca and 2 from Lovelock were charged separately, processed separately, and are an accounting that belongs to the federal court record rather than this story. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Clifford Marsh was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison on the trafficking and forced labor counts. He was eligible for parole consideration after 8 years, at the discretion of a federal board that would have, at that point, access to the full case record. His attorney filed an appeal. The appeal was denied. The debt spreadsheet, the $31,400, was formally voided by Priscilla Okafor's counter-civil action. The court found the debt instrument fraudulent on its face, based on Tombstone's forensic accounting. Clifford Marsh was ordered to repay $14,200 to Deb Pruitt as restitution for the fabricated entries, money she had earned at the Silver Sage Diner while he constructed a fiction to make her believe she owed it. She used the restitution for a used car. A Honda Civic, 2018, with 44,000 miles and a cracked rear bumper that she didn't bother getting fixed. She drove it off the lot on a Tuesday afternoon. Alone. No tracker on her wrist. No check-in at 4 p.m. Nowhere she was required to be. She drove west on Highway 80 for 20 minutes, not going anywhere in particular. Then she turned around and drove back. Because she had somewhere to be. That was the new thing. She had places she actually wanted to return to. 14 months later. The woman at table 7 was 26 years old, and she had been nursing the same cup of coffee for 40 minutes and looking at the door every 90 seconds, with the particular vigilance of someone who has learned to track exits. Deb noticed it in the first 4 seconds. She always noticed it in the first 4 seconds. She poured a fresh cup of coffee, the woman hadn't asked for one, and walked to the table with the pot. "You want something to eat?" Deb said. The woman looked up. Dark eyes, quick assessment, a practiced smile that reached exactly as far as politeness required. Deb recognized the smile. She had worn it for 2 years and 4 months. She set the pot down. She did not leave. She said, "My name's Deb. I'm not going anywhere for a few minutes, and the pie's good today." The woman looked at her for a moment. The assessment in her eyes shifted. Not from stranger to friend, but from potential threat to something more careful and more open than that. "I don't have a lot of money," the woman said. "Coffee's on me," Deb said. "Pie too if you want it." She sat down across the table because she had learned from a man who had once done the same for her that the position of the person offering help mattered. You sit, not stand. You bring yourself to eye level. You make yourself the one who can be walked away from, not the one blocking the door. The woman's name was Keeley. She was 26. She had driven 90 minutes from Elko on a Tuesday afternoon because she'd heard about a diner where someone might listen. Word traveled in this desert the way it always had, slow and thorough and certain as water. Deb poured the coffee. She set the pot down. She folded her hands on the table. "Start from the beginning," she said. "I've got the time." Outside, in the Highway 80 afternoon, the Nevada desert was doing what it always did, holding its light long and flat and without apology, the silver sage running in every direction, the mountains west going blue as the sun crossed. The kind of afternoon where everything looks exposed and nowhere to hide. Deb's name tag said DB. The collar of her uniform was not frayed. She had bought 2 new ones in October. Her key was in her apron pocket. Her own key to her own apartment on Cedar Street, with her name on the lease and new locks on both windows. And at a corner table in the Silver Sage Diner, 14 months after a retired highway patrol officer had turned his road map over to the blank side and written one word on it, Deb Pruitt sat across from a young woman from Elko and listened. Reuben Cross was 3 hours south of Winnemucca when the message came through. He was on a route he had been planning when all of this started. The road map that had become an order ticket, the road trip that had become something else entirely. He had finally gotten back to it in late May, after the trial and the sentencing, and the last of the federal depositions. He was riding south. The Mojave opening up ahead of him, the wide sky Nevada emptiness that he had been riding through for 30 years. He had a folder on his phone, labeled, in the direct way of a man who had spent 22 years on state-issued paperwork, "Why We Ride." It had started as one message, then 3, then 11, then a number he had stopped counting sometime around the 8th month. Messages from strangers whose daughters had gotten out, whose mothers had been found, whose sisters had finally been believed. Strangers who had no idea who Reuben Cross was but knew the chapter name and had a phone number and needed to tell someone that the thing that had been impossible had become possible. He pulled over at a rest stop south of Fallon. He read the message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. It said, "She's doing okay. Teaching another one how to do the same. Thought you'd want to know." D. He read it twice. He sat on his bike at the rest stop with the Mojave ahead and the high desert behind him, and thought about Janet, who had said once that the best conversations in Nevada happened at diner counters. He had not been sure she was right for a long time. He was sure now. Not because every conversation at a diner counter led to something. Most of them were just coffee and the time of day and someone passing through. But because the ones that mattered completely. Because noticing, really noticing, not looking past, not accepting the surface, was the thing that determined everything that followed. He had spent 22 years noticing things on Nevada highways, and then 9 years afterward trying to figure out what it was all in service of. He had an answer now, or something close enough to one. He put the phone in his pocket. He started the bike. The road south ran long and straight, and he led it. There is something underneath this story that is easy to miss if you're moving too fast. It isn't really about bikers. It isn't about patches or road names or the particular mythology of Hell's Angels that tends to crowd out everything else when those words appear in a sentence. Those things are real and they matter, but they're the vehicle, not the destination. This story is about noticing. It is about the difference between looking at something and seeing it, between being in the presence of suffering and registering it. Deb Pruitt was in that diner every day. 4 different people had access to what was happening to her. Close access, daily access, the kind of access that leaves no room for the excuse of not knowing. And 4 times, the choice was made to accept the surface and move on, not out of cruelty, out of the very human preference for the explanation that requires less of you. One man, on one afternoon, looked up from his roadmap and chose differently. If you are someone who has ever been that person in the diner, the one trying to hold it together for one more shift, photographing your tips because the alternative is worse, this is for you. The Rubens of the world exist. They stop at diners. They notice sleeves. And when they hear 9 words that don't add up, they don't pick up their coffee and move on. If you are someone who has watched a Deb from a distance and made the choice Gary made, the one he had to live with for 8 months, it is not too late to make a different choice. The thing you saw matters. The thing you noticed counts. Write the letter. Make the call. Tell someone who can do something with it. And if you have ever been the person at the diner counter who looked directly at the tracker and chose the husband's explanation, this story is asking you one question. Not with judgment, with genuine curiosity. What would you do if you saw it again? The AC unit at the Silver Sage cycles on. A sound Deb still knows by heart, because some things live in your body long after the circumstances that put them there are gone. The country radio plays something quiet and old, with real heartbreak in it. The Nevada afternoon comes through the window glass, wide and white and exposing. And at the corner table, the same corner table where a road map was once turned over to the blank side, a woman named Deb is sitting across from someone who needs to hear that the beginning of getting out is telling one person who actually has the time. She has the time. She has always had the time. It just took her a while to find someone who knew it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to this channel and drop a comment below telling me not just where you're watching from, but this. Who in your life would stop at the diner? Who is the person you'd want at that corner table if it were you? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that noticing is an act of courage. And tell me your city below. I want to know how far this one travels. More stories like this one are coming. Because Deb's table at the Silver Sage is not the only one in Nevada. And Reuben Cross is not the only man who knows how to turn a road map over and write one word on the back. They're everywhere. You just have to look.